Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is a care collab that I'm going to break with tradition and not do the normal in a far off grow room and all the channels, because there aren't enough. There's only a couple of us, so the channels that are taking part in this will be in the description if you go and have a look there. Now, Aerangis fastuosa, classed as a miniature, which it is. This is one of the Madagascan Aerangis. Now, some of them grow in the mainland Africa, some grow in Madagascar, some grow in both, and there's another couple of islands to the northwest of Madagascar that also have some of the Aerangis. Now, this little one was originally classed as an Angraecoids fastuosum, I believe, but it was transferred in the early 1900s to the Aerangis genus. Now, this is a strange one until you get to know it, because the plant looks very Phalaenopsis-like a mini fowl in some degrees, but not all. The Aerangis have a trait. Nearly all of them have that on the end of the leaves. If you take the centre line down the leaf, when you get to the end, half of the leaf is shorter than the other half. So it doesn't have a rounded end or a pointed end, it has this kink in it. And most of the Aerangis that I've seen do that. That just seems to be a trait. Now, these are variable. The plant is variable, the blooms are variable, and even where you find it is variable. These can grow in genuine evergreen rainforest type conditions, where they would be quite heavily shaded, and up the far end of intermediate, even into hot, warm growing, up into that category. And then they can be found in open forests where there's seasonal rainfall and there's dry periods. But the one thing that the areas that they do grow in, even in the open forest, they tend to be near water. So they like their humidity. Obviously, the warmer, the higher the level of humidity that's required. They have a very fine root system. Now, you can grow these in a pot. Some say they grow just as well in a pot as on a mount. Some say better. Some say mounts are best, so please yourself. But the one thing I would recommend is that they're a little bit like Tolumnias in as much as their roots don't like to stay soggy. They need air around them. Now, these can often be found growing on twigs, so again, like Tolumnias, twig epiphytes. Not always, sometimes on small branches, but they're rarely found on larger branches or on trunks. They've headed away from the main part of the trees, towards the ends or in the lower undergrowth. Not recommended to get full sun on these unless it's early morning or late afternoon. They are classed as shady growers. You take that with a pinch of salt, depending on what part of the world you come from. Because what is shady in the tropics would be classed as pretty good light in the, north of the northern hemisphere or south of the southern hemisphere. So take that with a pinch of salt. Unless in direct sun in the UK, I don't class anywhere in the UK as having high light. It's only the sun can produce that here. Whereas, the nearer you get to the equator, high light can be achieved in shade. So take that with a pinch of salt. Blooms on these for the size of the plant are large, but they're not large blooms, directly, if you take them in context of other orchids. They vary in colour they can have hints of yellow, hints of a sort of fawny colour, hints of green, creamy colours, but fundamentally their basic colour is white. They're fragrant at night to attract the night pollinators, which are moths. So, if you're attracting your pollinator at night, it's no good being bright red, is it? Because it won't show up. So most Aerangis tend to be very pale colours, and they just don't need the colours, so they just lose it. And it helps them show at night. But they attract their pollinators by scent, basic fragrance. It's said to be like lily of the valley or something along those lines, and then there's lots of people thinking, what the hell's lily of the valley? Well, it's a common name for a plant that is known to be very fragrant. That's a shade-loving plant in the UK. You can grow that in the forests or in a wooded area. It can carpet the ground. Anyway, the unusual thing about the leaves on this is that they appear slightly crinkled on the top side, which can make you think the plant's dehydrated. You know, when a Phalaenopsis leaf gets dehydrated, it gets like a crinkly surface to it, which is bad news on a Phalaenopsis, but that's natural on these. Monopodial, so new leaves will come from the top, but occasionally they will grow small plants from the base. I personally don't class those as keikis because they are a basal growth. That would be a better description, because they don't come halfway up the plant, if you see what I mean. They settle in at the base. The base of the plant and the roots are prone to rotting if kept wet and cool. You're better off keeping these warm. They'll be happier. They do like their humidity high. Now, since I moved here, my humidity has dropped dramatically, and so far I don't see any ill effects. Now, this little plant is growing on next to no moss. I'll probably lose focus now. Hang on, let me zoom back out, and then I can pick it up, because I'm zoomed right in to get a nice close-up. Decided a tripod today. There's hardly any moss on this plant, and if you look at the base of the plant is not on the mount. It's away from the mount. The roots are holding it on the mount. Now, this one needs this little bit of old zombie moss, sphagnum moss, scraped off. It's not doing any harm, but it will be better gone because it's been on there a long time now. It needs coming off. And then I'll put some live moss around the mount. But the place I won't put it is at the base of the plant. I'll leave that clear. You can see there is a very clear area there. And I want to keep mine like that. So all the roots that have headed off in all directions and over the top of the mount and coming round the side of the mount, they can have some live moss on them, but it'll be in like a circle with a piece in the centre, not covered in moss. They drop old leaves occasionally. You shouldn't be dropping more leaves than you're growing, and if you are, there's something not right, and the something not right will probably be humidity more than anything. It could be a nutrition issue. It could be that the plant's pulling the nutrition into the new growths, leaving not enough for the old growths to be maintained. It's unusual. These are not high feeders. They're slow growing, low feeding orchids. But what they don't like is to stay dry for any length of time. So however you decide to grow them, mine's bone dry at the moment, and it's not getting watered today. Yeah? So, they can take that. They'll grow better if they get the wet-dry cycle on a daily basis. But once I get my moss on there, that won't be achievable because the moss will stay wet longer than a day. So they will take a little longer to dry out, but the moss won't be on all of the roots. It'll only be on some of them. And new roots will push into that or choose to avoid it, yeah? They can please themselves. The spurs on this one are quite long, down here, and sometimes they curl, sometimes they have a coil, not always, and I've never found out what environmental factor would make them do that, and it might not be environmental, I don't know, but sometimes those spurs do coil. Now, these are nectar reservoirs. That's the reward for the moth for pollinating the plant, and unlike a lot of orchids, it does offer a reward to its pollinator. A lot of orchids don't. They mimic the reward and then don't give it up So the pollinator does all the work and gets nothing for it. Oh dear. There's a principle in there somewhere, I'm sure. But anyway, that's my little fastuosa. This is a young plant. It's not a mature plant. Mature plants should get 4, 5, occasionally 6 blooms on a spike, and often more than one spike at once. And they can look pretty spectacular. A mature plant with 3 or 4 spikes is an absolute stunner. As far as I know, they bloom once a year, and certainly in the UK that time is sort of late winter, early spring under normal circumstances. And this is my replacement. My original plant did well, bloomed every year, grew nicely, and I came down one morning and all the leaves were on the floor. And I warn you, Aerangis have that trait. I had an Alicii as well, which is one of the larger ones. The spike took 11 months to grow before the first bloom opened. It bloomed, and then a few weeks later, all the leaves were on the floor, and it died. And the encyclopedia I've got, in the general notes on the Aerangis genus, it does say that quite a few of them are relatively short-lived for orchids. And that's in the wild, yeah? So, you know, in an artificial environment where it's very rarely perfect compared with the wild, you're probably going to get that early death now and again, and it may be nothing you've done. They might just keel over, as I say. Compared with some orchids, relatively short-lived. So that's my little Aerangis. I'm pleased it bloomed this year. That got a first at the Wessex Orchid Show. It was in a class of one of one. So obviously it got a first. But no silverware for that class, so no cup. Anyway, that's it. Short and sweet. Aerangis, I like it as a genus because the leaves are variable. The plants vary in size, although their conditions don't vary too much, but there are some Aerangis that like quite bright light. There are some in the genus that have only ever been found on 1 or 2 trees, and only on the trunks, and never in any moss. Now, that would not be easy to replicate. You don't find many of those in cultivation. They seem to have some sort of relationship with the bark on those trees. But nobody does any work on it, you know, nobody does any investigations or scientific sort of studies and things, so we're never going to find out, I suspect. And given the way Madagascar's going, they'll probably all be extinct soon anyway. You know, it's cut all the forest down and plant palm oil. Yay! Anyway, that's mine. Luckily, a lot of the Aerangis are in cultivation successfully, so they would at least, the species would at least be maintained, if not in the wild. That's it. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.